In the state of Ohio, two brave men discovered this strange mountaintop cave entrance during a simple hike-and-climb adventure. It was sealed off tightly, but with clever thinking and some force, they managed to pry open the door which concealed the darkness within. And what they found next was hard to believe. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming stories. The morning sun cast a warm, golden glow over the peaks as Brody and Mike paused to catch their breath. They were midway through their planned hiking route, which led them to a steep mountainside cliff. It was a daring climb that would shun away most climbers, but Brody and Mike stared upwards with confidence. Both Brody and Mike were seasoned hikers, used to rugged terrain, tricky climbs, and even the occasional odd encounter with wildlife. That's why they knew they could climb this beast off a cliffside, but they'd never expected to find anything quite like this. Mike pointed up at the steep cliff looming ahead of them. It was a tough climb, but nothing they hadn't prepared for. Brody grinned, catching the gleam of excitement in his friend's eyes. They began their ascent up the cliffside, digging their fingers into grooves and gripping onto rocks, one step at a time. The calm wind brushed against their faces, and they climbed in silence for a while, focused on finding steady holds and keeping balance. But it wasn't long before Brody's attention was snagged by something unusual. About halfway up the cliff, he noticed a strange formation on their right. Narrowing his eyes, he leaned closer, squinting at what appeared to be straight lines carved in the cliffside, too straight to be formed by anything in nature. "Hey Mike, check this out!" he called, motioning for his friend to come over. Mike, who was still focused on their route upward, glanced over, a bit impatient. As Mike got closer, he too paused, his eyebrows moving together in confusion. There, on the cliffside, were strange, perfectly straight lines that looked as though they'd been deliberately etched into the rock long ago. These carved edges didn't fit in with the rest of the natural landscape. Mike urged his friend to be careful, but Brody's interest was already piqued too much. He moved away from their planned route and edged toward a narrow ledge on which this bizarre frame stood. Mike and Brody discovered a mysterious, smooth structure in the wilderness that appeared out of place. Intrigued by its precise, unnatural lines, they examined it closely and concluded it was man-made, possibly resembling a doorway. Driven by curiosity, they decided to investigate further and use their climbing gear to create a lever system in an attempt to open or move the structure. Recalling the knot techniques he'd learned years ago in Boy Scouts, Brody created a steady pulley system. They hooked these ropes onto the giant boulder using drill bits, which were normally used to secure themselves to a steep cliffside. And with every part of the pulley system now attached, it only required muscle strength to finish the job. "Ready?" Brody asked as his grip tightened around the rope he had just fastened. Mike gave a determined nod. "Let's do it." They pulled together, muscles straining and hands gripping hard against the ropes. Little by little, the boulder started to shift, grinding against the rock with a deep rumble. With a final, united heave, the massive stone tumbled backward, landing with a loud crash that vibrated through the cliff. A dark hole opened up before them, where the boulder had once stood, leading into the heart of the cliffside. The two friends looked at each other, eyes wide with excitement and just a hint of caution. "What do you think could be in there?" Mike asked Brody curiously. But both friends knew that there was only one way to find out. Their route upwards needed to be canceled. A 5-mile hike through the forest beyond this cliffside wasn't even half as exciting as wandering around a mysterious hidden cave. Brody and Mike had made up their minds. They were ready to explore this darkness. But what they would find inside was unlike anything they could have ever expected. Their discovery would push them toward a direction nobody could have prepared them for. The two friends unclipped their safety anchors from the cliffside and illuminated their flashlights for the journey ahead. Their first obstacle was a long and dark tunnel. The air inside this structure was incredibly humid, and after walking just 30 feet, they noticeably felt the temperature plummet. Brody touched the tunnel walls and felt his hands dripping wet with moisture. The low temperature, combined with the high moisture content in the air, explained the dampness of these walls. But what added extra intrigue to this action was that the fluids on Brody's hands smelled horrible. "Dude, this smells like rotten eggs," Brody said with disgust. Mike stated that the presence of sulfur in a tunnel like this made sense. These walls are perfectly cut out, which clearly indicates that they are man-made, and to carve out a tunnel like this, they would have needed to use dynamite, which contains high levels of sulfur, and sulfur smells like rotten eggs. Mike's explanation made sense, but it also made Brody nervous. He got why tunnels needed to be punched out with dynamite, but what if the explosions made this entire mountainside unstable? They were heading deeper into a dark corridor with the potential for collapsing rock all around them. The two men stopped for a moment to think things over. They were close enough to the exit to abort their mission instantly, but curiosity about where this tunnel led was still very much present within the two men. And then something happened that catapulted their discussion completely one way. Brody looked at the outside light moving into the tunnel behind them and was already walking toward it when suddenly a loud whining sound arose from deep within the mountain. You might think these two men would have shot out of that tunnel within seconds, but you would be wrong if you did. Besides the fear of the structure collapsing in on top of them, there was nothing more they wanted than to explore further. Brody and Mike were adrenaline junkies, and this sound easily pushed them toward danger. The two men turned their bodies back toward the darkness and started running toward it. The sound continued, guiding Brody and Mike deeper, so that's what they did. The two men ran across the smooth surface, with the occasional damp puddle, until they witnessed a second proof of human interaction. Tools were leaned up against the walls here. There were mostly shovels and pickaxes. Brody picked one of them up, inspecting every part of it, and that's when he noticed something. The shovel blade was all rusted and corroded, not to mention that the shovel stood in a deep puddle, but the wooden handle looked almost brand new, as if it had been bought not more than a couple of years ago. Brody and Mike speculated that whoever dug this tunnel must have done so years and years ago, leaving this mountainside abandoned for almost as long. But this changed things. What if we're not alone in here? Right after Brody spoke those words, the sound passed by their ears again, and this time it frightened them just that bit more. The high-pitched noise sounded closer this time, and its intonation varied more than before. Brody and Mike heard the formation of words, followed by cheerful whistling. "It's coming our way, hide," Brody whispered to his friend. There was no large boulder or corner to behind, and the exit was too far away to make a run for it, so Brody and Mike could only stand against the opposite wall and push themselves as flat as possible against it. Their flashlights were turned off, and they held their breath while the whistling grew closer. The duo saw an older man approach the tools and pick up a shovel before turning back. The old man's light source, a simple oil lantern, grew smaller in the distance, and Brody and Mike knew that they had to follow it if they ever wanted to find out what was going on in there. The duo moved forward using the lantern as a guide. The duo moved slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. They also could not use their flashlights because that would undoubtedly alarm the person they were stalking. So, using his hands to graze the tunnel walls, Brody navigated the almost pitch-black darkness. Brody and Mike crept forward, following the faint glow of the old man's lantern until they reached a large, open room. The entire cave was illuminated by lanterns. The two friends stayed low, quickly ducking behind a huge metal machine. From their hidden spot, they peered at the old man, who was wielding a pickaxe. He swung it forcefully against the cave wall, each impact echoing through the chamber. For about 10 minutes, he hacked steadily, pausing only to wipe his brow. Finally, he stopped, breathing heavily, and reached into his jacket pocket. Mike's eyes widened in disbelief when the old man held up a gleaming rock. "Dude, is that gold?" he whispered, leaning closer to Brody. Brody quickly silenced him, afraid they'd be discovered. But then, the man walked over to the machine they were hiding behind. A low hum and a rush of heat startled them. The machine they leaned against roared to life, and they felt intense warmth radiating through the metal. Unable to bear the heat, they cried out and jumped back, clutching their faces. The machine turned out to be a coal oven which had just been turned on by the old man. The boys' painful shouts were like alarms in this hollow cave system. A mysterious old man reacted aggressively when he heard Mike and Brody, initially confronting them with a pickaxe and accusing them of trying to steal something he called his sparkle. Although suspicious, Brody held up his hands in surrender, quickly explaining how they'd stumbled upon the tunnel by accident. He eventually calmed down after hearing their explanation and agreed to lead them further into the tunnel. As they followed him through a narrow passage, he revealed that his name was Bob and that he had been living in the mountains for over 40 years. Bob explained how he discovered gold back in the 1980s and, over the years, had dug out this entire tunnel system by hand and explosive. Occasionally, he'd leave to hunt or repair his tools in a cabin above ground, but otherwise he stayed in the mountain, adding to his growing stash of sparkle, as he called it. When they entered a larger room, Brody and Mike were left speechless. Before them lay a towering pile of gold nuggets, sparkling in the dim oil lamplight. The sight was surreal. The glinting gold, a sharp contrast to the rough, dark stone of the cave walls. Mike's mouth dropped open. "This must be worth millions of dollars," he whispered in awe. Bob nodded, a hint of pride on his face. But Brody noticed a tired look in Bob's eyes, as well as if the weight of all the gold had worn him down instead of lifting him up. As Bob told them more, the two friends began to understand. Bob had become obsessed with sparkle, gathering more and more gold each day. But he never had a plan for what to do with it, and being isolated for so long, he'd lost any idea of how to re-enter society or use his fortune. Brody and Mike exchanged a glance. They felt sorry for Bob, realizing he was trapped not by the mountain but by his own obsession. Gently, they suggested that he didn't have to keep living like this. There was a way out. He could enjoy the wealth he'd accumulated all these years, and they would even help him. Bob seemed hesitant, but Brody and Mike spoke with patience and kindness, convincing him that he deserved more than just a life of digging in darkness. They assured him that his gold could give him a better life, one where he could rest and be free from the lonely tunnel. Finally, Bob agreed, though uncertainty was written across his face. With Brody and Mike's help, he hauled the gold out of the mountain, piece by piece. The three worked tirelessly, determined to help Bob start a new chapter in his life. Slowly, the piles of gold transformed into a future for him. After weeks of negotiating and transporting the gold to a nearby city, they found a reputable buyer. Bob watched in disbelief as the sale went through. The final total, a staggering $23,823,900. For the first time, he grasped just how much he'd accumulated over the years in that mountain. A few months later, Bob took his first vacation. For the first time in over 4 decades, he wasn't waking up to the cold stone of the tunnel. Instead, he basked in the sun, feeling warmth that wasn't from the old coal oven but from a life filled with freedom and choices. Brody and Mike stayed in touch with Bob, who, despite his newfound wealth, chose a quiet life in a cute village in the countryside. Grateful for their friendship, he frequently thanked them for giving him a second chance. The two friends knew they'd helped Bob in more ways than just carrying gold from the mountain. Looking back, Brody and Mike often laughed at their adventure in the mountains. They were grateful for the unexpected lesson they'd learned about friendship, freedom, and what really mattered in life. It's not how much you got, it's about what you do with it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our upcoming stories.